All right. Welcome, everybody, to another PM Square live stream. I am your host, Vice President of Technology, Ryan Dolley, and today we are talking all about how to upgrade Cognos Analytics the right way. So I'm really excited to bring this one to you. I've got a very good friend of mine and someone who I think is maybe the best Cognos consultant on earth. Sonya Fournier will be joining us in just a few minutes to walk us through the ins and outs of how to do a Cognos upgrade the right way. And when we say the right way, we mean technically, yes, we want to make sure we're doing a good job. Technically, we've dotted all our T's, crossed all our I's, as you might say, and everything's running smoothly. But also, how do we make the most out of upgrade season? It's not something you do all the time, especially a major upgrade. So how do you figure out what needs to happen for the upgrade to not just be technically successful, but perceived as a big success in your organization? And that is what we're going to talk you through today, Sonya and I. So I'm going to bring her on in just a second. But before I get started, the sales guys, of course, would not let me continue if I did not talk to you about a few things. So let me just make sure I get my screen up here. There we go. So the first thing I want to talk about, events. What is coming up in PM Square land? Well, today's October 27th. You're here for the Upgrading Cognos live stream. On November 16th, we're doing a planning analytics webinar that you might want to sign up for about features that every multinational corporation should be using in planning analytics. So Brian Moore, who is our planning analytics practice lead, will be leading that. Brian's extremely knowledgeable. And if you work at a big company, this is a great event to attend to figure out how to get the most out of your investment in PA. Two other things I want to talk about before we bring Sonya on, and I'll keep this quick. One is, if you attended our 11.2.1 event, you know that we have a new version of the Cogbox out. If you haven't tried the Cogbox or you haven't heard of it, what it is it's a free extension to Cognos that gives you a lot of really powerful capabilities that you don't have. Maybe closes a few little gaps that we all kind of are hoping IBM will eventually close themselves. But until then, PM Square's got your back. So check that out. It's pmsquare.com/cogbox. And the final thing, as we're going through this, if at any point you think to yourself, gee, it would be really great if someone would just do all this for me, we have a program at PM Square that takes care of that. We call it SaaS Anywhere. And the reason we call it that is because we look to bring the software as a service experience to you, no matter where you are running Cognos. So whether you've got it deployed on AWS or Azure or in your on-prem data center, we can take over complete management of it so that to you and your end users, it feels like a SaaS product. You do not have to think about the type of stuff that we will be talking you through today because we will handle it for you. That's a program that we're happy to offer. We've seen a lot of interest in it in our customer base, and it's just growing really rapidly. So if you fit that bill and you say, I want to get out of business of maintaining this, I want my team to be focused on delivering value with data and not just data infrastructure, give us a call and we can help you out with that. And so with no further ado, I'm going to bring on Sonya. All right, Sonya, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, welcome. So I talked you up a little bit in the intro, but
no pressure.
No pressure. So Sonya is one of our most senior consultants here at PM Square, and someone who I will tell you, I often make this joke, and it's true. I play a Cognos expert on the internet, and Sonya is actually a Cognos expert. And so, Sonya, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about you and your experience with Cognos?
Sure. So I started with Cognos, actual Cognos, before IBM in 2002. Started on the education team and did training probably for about 5-6 years primarily, and then moved into our consulting kind of wing of things. And so I've been dealing with kind of all aspects of Cognos, from data gathering all the way through to user presentations all the way along, and primarily a lot in the last little while, a lot of upgrades. That's kind of where we've been, a lot of other things too, but I've done a lot of upgrades. So
So here's a question I always ask when I have a real Cognos Pro on here, and that is, what is, if you think back to all the things that have ever been in Cognos, like the features or studios, which one was your favorite?
All right. So I know we always disagree on this one, but I'm a pretty big framework manager fan. PowerPlay, the studio before it moved web, was always, I think that's the answer I'm supposed to give. I don't know. I really like what we're doing now. I'm really excited about the kind of ease of use for users and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I think I'll always be a fan of some of the old stuff, but I love the way it's grown, and I love the way we can take some of that old content and make it new now. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, I think a lot of, if you talk to old timers, a lot of times the correct answer is PowerPlay / Transformer, right? And I'm a big Transformer fan. Definitely, the first 4 years of my Cognos career were pretty much 100% Transformer based. So anyway, all right, so we're going to jump into it. So as always, I know for our regulars, I don't have to remind you, but this is more fun for everyone when you get your questions and comments into the chat. So as we're going through, if there's an experience you'd like to share, or something you'd like other people to know, or a question you have, get it into the chat. And I will do my best to stop every once in a while and take a look at it. Because Sonia and I were talking beforehand, and this is a topic that we could go on about probably forever. And so so we'll do our best to keep it valuable and on point, but get your questions in so we can answer them as we go through. All right. You guys know I don't like sharing PowerPoints. However, this is the type of topic where it just seems like we need to do that. And so we do have a little PowerPoint presentation that we're going to step through here about how to upgrade Cognos like a pro. And I put Sonia's name on here and not mine because she's the pro, and I'm like I said, I play one on the internet. So we've got this broken into two sections. So there's, and I kind of said this earlier, but there is the technical, how do I do this and not break everything, which is the core of it. But then there's the, okay, but how do I do this and not break everything and walk away from it with people saying, boy, we sure are glad we did that. And that's the second part of the presentation today. So we're going to go through the technical stuff first, and then we're going to talk through kind of the overarching, what's the best way to approach this philosophically. They're going to intermingle a little, but that's kind of overall our approach here. So the most important thing, or at least the first thing we think you should think about, is you need to ask the right questions before you start. And this is both technically and kind of process-wise. And if that's the best way to set yourself up for success when you launch on this process. Sonia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest I don't know. Let's go back for a second, because we can approach an upgrade two ways. One, you can have somebody come in and do it for you or with you, and that's usually where we fall into the game. Or you could be doing this yourself. So whether you're, if you're internal in a company and you're about to upgrade your environment, there are questions you need to ask and consider before you jump in. And if you're coming in from the consultant side of things, if you're like me, there are questions that we can ask as a consulting organization to make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time and doing it well. And then there's just a few of these. I won't go through all of them necessarily, but there's a lot of the standard tech questions. So, are you going on to new servers? Are you doing an over-top installation? How many environments do you have? What do those environments look like? What operating systems are you on? Where are your databases? There's a lot of those sort of tech questions that are, the more you know before you jump into an upgrade, the better your upgrade will go. There's a lot of licensing questions, beyond just, I want to go to the newest version. The licensing part of this can really be make or break. You really need to be very careful for what you put and how you plan it. And then there's the content. So who are your users? What kind of content do you have? like Ryan asked from the beginning, are you taking old transformer models that you need to move up, or are you looking at brand new dashboards? What do you have for your content, and who are your users? And so we have a lot of questions that we'll ask before we even start that kind of gather that information. How are we going to make sure this worked? What are our testing options that we want? How are we going to get this out to our users? How do we make sure that the communication is taken care of? Who does the communication? All those sort of things are really important to ask before we even start hitting any servers and doing installations. And then we have a bunch of questions that always get missed, or maybe not always get missed, but that you can be much more successful if you know the question. So, things like what worked well in your existing environment. What didn't work well in your existing environment. What do users want to see? What will users not tolerate changing? Those are two big questions that often don't get asked. And it can be critical. Like if all of a sudden you take away the one thing that a user group depends on, that can become a big issue with how successful your upgrade is. Another one that we always like to ask, and I think is super important, is what challenges have you had with upgrades in the past? So, sometimes we do upgrades from point to point, and often we do upgrades from, 10.2.1 up to 11.7 or 11.1.2. So why the delay? Was there a challenge in the past that you couldn't get that upgrade done the way you wanted it, or, those sort of things. So we'd like to know that before we start. And then the other one gets really into, have you done all the notifications before of the people who are going to be required to do this? So before you even start, there's a lot of work to do. And the big one is kind of asking the right questions.
Yeah. And, I think that's a great point. And when we do this with clients, like I can tell you, I've scoped out now probably well over 100 Cognos upgrades over the last 4 or 5 years since I joined PM Square. And we learned these lessons the hard way. I think when we were a real fledgling organization, we employ really world-class Cognos people. And so it was like, we can just handle whatever comes our way, we can handle, which is true. But you have to plan for it, even if you have world-class skills. And so there's, when you engage with us on this, there's a lot of stuff that we do. Like there's a scoping spreadsheet we'll send you that asks you a bunch of technical questions and some of the questions Sonya mentioned. And one of the things that I always think about too, and I was having a conversation with a potential client yesterday about this, about upgrading. They're on 10.2.2 and they want to go to 11.2.1. And the question I asked them, and this is an important thing that gets to like the flavor of the upgrade, or what type is it going to be, is this a carrot upgrade or is this a stick upgrade? Okay. Right. So are we moving because we want this shiny new thing we want? There's capabilities we need. We want to redo the way we interact with data as an organization. Or are we moving because, Cognos is installed on server 2012 and we're doing a data center upgrade to go to server 2019, and Cognos 10 can't run on server 2019. So we have to go to Cognos 11. And they're both valid reasons to upgrade, but understanding that can really help steer the upgrade in the right direction.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, and it's like I said, the more you know before you jump into this, the easier the process will be. Less surprises. One of the biggest challenges with upgrading is we often underscope them. Not. It's very easy to think, okay, well, 4 boxes, 3 days to upgrade. We could go with it through there. But there's a lot of stuff that actually has to be done kind of within the scope of upgrade that isn't really, it's not just software that we're doing. There's, I know we'll talk more about kind of the real benefits of upgrading and how we get there, but there's a lot that is beyond just what the servers look like. So,
yeah. A couple questions that came in that we'll field right now before we move on. Before I get to the questions, one thing I'm going to ask you to do is, if you appreciate this kind of content, go ahead and click the like button right now to help us grow the Cognos community on YouTube. If you look on YouTube, there's a ton of Power BI stuff. There's a ton of Tableau stuff. We got to get Cognos up there, right? And the way we're going to do that is, if you appreciate what we're doing here on PM Square, we need you to click the like button and share this with other Cognoids out there. So go ahead and do that right now. Now, a couple questions. So Rick, hello, Rick. Nice to see you again. Heard, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe you don't either, but Rick heard that in 11.2.1, they cleaned up the CSS files substantially. And so do you know, is there anything that we need to do related to that?
I hadn't heard that. When I did our 11.2.1 upgrade on our internal servers, I didn't do anything specific to that. So I don't know. We can look into that and see if there's anything specific. I don't think, like, it didn't feel like there was anything we needed to do along those lines. If they did clean that up, this might be one of those topics that we would talk about with whether you do an overtop of install or you do a new machine install.
Yeah.
That's kind of some of the stuff we consider when we're in there. How much have they modified in the like, we could always install on top, but sometimes when they make these type of changes, rather than having to worry about going to clean them up, it's easier sometimes to start with a new box and then move over our content. So I know we'll discuss more on that, but yeah, those are the types of things that might have come, might be something that we would consider.
Yeah. And then Murali has a number of good questions. So they break down into two categories. One, I think we actually address later on in the presentation. So that one is about validation versus it actually, if something validates, does that mean that it runs, or does that mean that it upgraded? No.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll dive into that deeper.
Yep.
So stick around. But the other question is, so they're on 11.1.7 Fix Pack 1. And the question is, do we really need to upgrade to 11.2? None of their particular issues appear to have appear on any of the IBM fix lists for 11.2. Right. So the question is, do we really need to go? And I think from my perspective, you can stay on 11.7.1. Now you're on Fix Pack 1. I think they're up to Fix Pack 4.
I would definitely go to 3 at least.
Yeah.
1 has a lot of issues. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, but 1 had a couple of issues. It wasn't a lot of issues, but like there were a couple of big things with schedules and stuff like that. If those are issues that you're having if it's working fine, then I don't think you have to go up at that point. I think 11.7.1.7 and 1.2 they're not completely different beasts, but the interface changes will make a lot of people consider whether they're going to do that upgrade immediately or not. Any of the point upgrades within 11.1.7 are probably worth doing just simply for the either performance fixes or but there were, like I said, very minor bug fixes inside of there. 11.1.2 will give you kind of the new feel, getting to that kind of carbon look and the a little bit easier to navigate around if you're a user in there. So I think there's definitely some really good features in the newer release. I think it really just depends on what your plans are with your audience and your users. And there, I mean, I think the only thing we want to be really careful of, and this is one of those, we're seeing a lot of people now facing, is I don't think we want to do 10 years before we go up to the next version. So we're seeing a lot of customers who, 10.2.1, 10.2.2 was super stable. You might have point fixed inside of there and it didn't change any functionality. And now we're kind of being either, like you said, carrot and stick. We're being forced to upgrade, or we're being, we can't run it on our servers we want to use, or that sort of thing. There's security fixes. So I think we want to make sure that part of the upgrade plan includes the next upgrade thoughts, like when are we going to do this again? And we're not going to hold 10 years anymore like we used to. It doesn't have, like, that's not the way the development process is working. And I think, there's so much changing in the last little bit where the tools are starting to get so much more advanced that we really don't want to hold like we did in the past. I think you really don't want to just kind of stay where you are with that. I think we have to start thinking about how we kind of incorporate upgrades into our environment more frequently.
Yeah. And luckily it has gotten a lot easier over the life of 11, where, the over-the-top upgrade is pretty good at this point. And a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, I would have told you to avoid it.
Yep. No, 100%.
But it's much better. Okay. So we are going to now we're going to talk through some kind of more technical topics, and then kind of over the next series of slides. So the first, and I get asked this question all the time: server sizing and config. How big should it be? How many cores do I need? How much memory? All of that stuff. And there's no hard and fast rule, I would say, that it's other than to say, I mean, obviously, if you can throw infinite resources at it, then things will be great.
Yeah.
But what I generally tell people is at least 8 gigs of RAM per core. Now, some maybe 16. Like if you're all on DQM or you're using data sets, both of which are things I think you should be doing at this point, maybe 16 gigs of RAM per core. But at a minimum, I'd have 8.
Yeah.
And then I like to start. You can get by with 4 cores on an application server, but I like to start at 8. And go up as needed. So really, that's kind of the sizing I would put in place. And then luckily, most clients at this point are in some sort of cloud or virtualized environment where if we decide we need to double the RAM or add 4 more cores, it's not the end of the world. A very important point that I'm glad, Sonya, you always remind me of, because I sometimes get locked into this default mode of assuming everybody has named user licensing.
Right.
A lot of clients have PVU licensing. And so if you're one of those clients and say you're going from 10 to 11, you're going to find yourself in a situation where 11 really does need probably more cores than what 10 needed, but your licensing is going to constrain you. So you need to think about how to manage that. And I will tell you, like, if you find yourself in that situation, you can call us. We don't just do consulting. We do Cognos resell. We help people with licensing. And now is a good time of year to try to solve that. I mean, a pro tip would be, IBM and many other tech companies get very hungry at the end of Q4. And so if you are in this situation, you need to buy more PVUs. November and December are great times to have those conversations with your sales rep. And we can help you with that if you need it. A couple other points. Install on 2 directories. So typically, I would say Windows is on the C drive, Cognos is on the D drive. That's the way I couldn't even tell you exactly why you should do that. I don't think it's just the way I was taught to do it, and I think it avoids sometimes conflicts or read-write conflicts between the OS and Cognos itself. How much hard drive should you have? I would just say blanket rule, a minimum of 100 gig on that Cognos directory. So on the D drive, 100 gigs. You can go up from there. Really, what you want to avoid is the temp folder filling up and the data folder filling up. You will know something's wrong because Cognos will just start acting crazy. And you'll be like, what in the heck is happening? And then eventually you'll think, is the drive full? And it will be, right? And then the final thing, and then I'll turn it over to Sonya for some feedback on this, is just, you could, so the data directory, which is where data sets get moved to nowadays, just to give you 20 seconds of background, data sets live in the content store. Someone accesses a data set from the UI. It goes through and moves it to the data directory on the application server that's processing the query. That specific directory is going to have spillover from queries and from data sets that exceed the memory settings on your machine. So you could move just that to the highest speed hard drive available to you. And that is now a configuration in Cognos. So that's something you can specifically set. Where does the data directory live? And it can be different from the rest of the install. And so that would be the other thing that I would recommend you do here. Another thing, I think I meant to add it to this slide and I didn't, is just look at the query service and compute service RAM settings and bump those up potentially. So those are sizing recommendations. Sonya, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the PVU limitations, I feel like the last number of installs and upgrades I've done have kind of fallen in there. And so, if that is your limitation, sometimes you're better off with 1 machine versus 2. So that's another thing to consider. So, if failover isn't a critical, the must always be 100% up, we can go with, one more powerful machine versus, maybe two app servers, like we've done in the past. So there's a lot to be. This is one of those really tricky questions we get asked all the time about how big your servers should be. And there are a ton of different things that have to come into play with this. So, if you're all kind of old school reporting, then it might be less important than, for some of these sizing things, then it matters if you're a looking at most of the new functionality. So that really does change kind of how we plan one of these installs and upgrades. We're going there. So a lot of different things that come into play with this one. So sadly, no nice, always do this.
Yeah. I would like to give you a clean answer, but there just really isn't one.
Yeah. It's magic. You just have to guess sometimes. We've done a lot of testing on this. So like we've done upgrades where we have installed 2 and we see what the performance is like, and then we go scale it back to 1, and then we bump that one up, and part of this it's a lot about what type of content you're doing and how it gets run and who's your user base, and is it all happening at the same time? Is it end of month? Is it is it interactive all the time? Is it really just scheduled jobs? Like there's a lot we can tune within here. But finding, like I said, this is the only easy answer is if you can throw more money at it, that usually helps, but that's not always the answer.
Right.
That's not the answer we like to go with, but that's kind of, there's, the more, like, always go with the most you can kind of afford power wise, and machine. That's the technical terms, but
yes. Yes. A couple of things before we talk through install considerations. Sean just made a comment. I like 11.2 so far. So I'd put in a plug. 11.2, I just think the user interface is much better for like in the Content Explorer, what we used to call Cognos connection. It's almost like they took the better elements of 11.1.7 and just layered it on to 10 in a way. So it's more 10-like. If you liked 10, and people liked 10, then 11.2 might be worth looking at. Okay, another question. Karan asks, is it recommended to use shared network drive or symbolic links for data directory? So I don't know if you have a thought on this.
Yeah. I think, again, it's going to depend on the way your servers are all configured. That for that data drive, for the last number of customers I've been on, I've left the data drive sort of set to the machine that it's on. And that seems to be fine. I do point other directories to shared network drives. So for things like, the deployment drives, and that's the primary one that I move like to a network drive. I want that to be in one place. But for things like the data drive, just kind of for the need for it to be as fast as possible, I've left it on the machine where it is. So if you kind of look at the Cognos configuration window, it's the .. directory, which means put it on this machine. So that's kind of what that question's really like looking for, is should we leave it there, or should we put it on another drive? I think it's configurable now, like what you were talking about with, we can move it to a different drive. So that's a possibility. But you do, like I said, I haven't had to move it yet because I haven't had anywhere that was processing data using data sets those data files where the need really came into play. But it would be something we could look at configuring. I haven't had a lot of experience with it.
Yeah, and just off the top of my head, I mean, the thing that I like about having it all on the local machine is that it's on the local machine, right? Yeah. And so you're not necessarily there's no chance of introducing any network issues into the process. And Cognos does a good job. I mean, if the local machine doesn't have the most recent copy of the data set, it'll go and fetch it. And yes, that will introduce, a one-time, some degree of delay, although I haven't seen that quantified.
No.
But I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah,
It's
I
kind of
would.
my
Yeah,
thought.
I mean, I think it would be one of the last things I would tweak right now, just because it does seem to be working fine
Yeah.
as is. But it is. I mean, it's a configurable option that it can do.
Yep. And I would also point out, Karan asked that question from LinkedIn. So we're trying a new thing. We're streaming not just to YouTube, but also to LinkedIn. And that question came from LinkedIn. So thank you, Karan, for joining us today. And cool that you were able to ask a question from LinkedIn. That's the first time that's happened on a live stream. So I'm excited that someone's watching us there. All right. So install considerations. What should we think about when it comes to the actual act of installing Cognos, how we go about it, and maybe the order of operations?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm going to preface every answer that I give here with it depends.
That's how I can tell you're a good
like
consultant,
it's always,
Sonya.
yeah, thanks. That and I'll Google it. No, so tons to consider with this. So again, we gather all that info and we start to think about what we're going to do. So the number one that comes up for us is over the top or fresh installs. So we can do over the top installs, I think all the way back to 10.2.2, maybe even 10.2.1. I wouldn't, but you could. So anything new, let's say we're in 11.1.7 and we're going to 11.2.1. So, a pretty minor change. And I know the environment doesn't have a ton of customizations. I would probably do an over the top install, or at least I would do a test of it. So maybe I would take the sandbox or dev machine test, what does it look like if we do that? If we have a ton of customizations, if we are going from an old version to a new version, if I don't want to interrupt the new or like the current, like let's say I don't have, when I'm doing our internal upgrades of our Cognos servers, I almost always do it over the top. I know I can take it down, get it back up again. It's not going to interrupt our kind of production world. And it's definitely the easiest way to work our way through. We don't have a ton of customizations. I can do that. If we're going like we're in the process of doing some 10.2.1s to 11.1.2s, I wouldn't do an over the top in there, especially if it's 10 years kind of out of sync. I'm always worried if especially if we've customized files. So I have customers that have had to do some customizations of actual configuration files to get things to work. Those ones I really like to do a brand new machine if I can, even for point releases or a brand new install folder or whatever that requires. Just because if they've fixed the issue that we've had to modify the change for, I want that to flow through. I don't want to have to use a customization unless I have to. So there's a lot that goes into kind of the decision about whether we do that over the top or fresh installs. For those of you who are still 10 versions, over the top was a nightmare in the past. Even early 11s were a bit shakier. It's actually quite I would say it actually works quite well to do it over the top now on the later versions. But again, a lot of little things to think about when we're doing that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that was great. What about dev, test, prod? Who should I install first? And then, you've got the three components of kind of the Cognos application: app server, content manager, and gateway. What about that? Like, should I do, the app server first, the CM first? Kind of which components and which environments should go first?
So again, same preface. This is not always the answer. Here's how I would look at it. When I'm going to do a test of an upgrade, I really want to know where my issues are going to come from. So let's say we have a 3-tier or a 3-system environment. And so I have dev, test, prod, let's say. If dev is often at companies, dev is a single machine. So often has gateway and app servers on the same. It's an all-in-one box, let's say. That's not usually the one I'm going to do first, because one of the things I really need to identify when I'm doing an upgrade is I need to know, like, are we going to have communication issues between the different boxes? So I'm not going to get that with dev. If I need something to quickly show we can do it, then I might do dev first. So this is again one of those situations where you really have to figure out what the overall company situation is. But if I know that I have, let's say, communication issues that are possible. So one of the things we've been doing a lot of lately is taking on-premise servers and then kind of recreating that environment in AWS. And so with on-premise servers, I'm pretty comfortable with making sure like we can figure out the firewalls and we know what needs to be there. Doing all of this in AWS is really just as easy, but it does introduce that another layer of like there's a different layer of communication between the AWS instances. So in that environment, I think it's super important that we actually kind of make sure we're testing that process as well. So not just the kind of it's kind of introduced that extra layer of of communication issues. So in that case, I would often do a test or prod first. If our real goal is prod, sometimes we start with the prod machine. So we do the prod install in a separate machine. Nobody's accessing it from there. And then it's a decision of, do we just then replicate it back to QA and dev, or I don't know. So there's a lot that goes into kind of which one of those installs we'll choose to do first. As to what piece of the process we do first, it's almost always application content manager first. That one is the most important. We need to make sure we can talk to the content store. We need to make sure, our audit store is available. Our security goes on that level. So we also have to make sure the security is working. So if I'm going to do an install, that's the first box I start with usually is like the primary app server, content manager, options from there. That gives me a chance to test things like the content connection to the content store, the connection to security, make sure that all of that works. I can run it because we can connect to that dispatcher directly. I don't need the gateway yet. And I like kind of the instant gratification of, something clapping for me. So I want to see something working as soon as I possibly can. So that content manager app store, that's the best option because I can actually run content once I get to that point. So I like to, get that one started, make sure that's running fine, and then I'll add the other pieces to kind of that tie to that one. But that's kind of where I would go for that.
And how do you know at that point, like how do you know when you're ready to actually bring content in and start content testing? Is it when the full-blown environment's built out?
So again, maybe this isn't the answer that everybody would give. I need to see it. I want to make sure that it's working. So I will often do that first pull in. Once I have a working content store and security turned in, I may take a deployment, whether it's from dev, whether it's from prod, wherever that might be, pull it in just to make sure that I think it's working the way it is. I will say, of all of these upgrades that we've done, it's not super common that things don't work when we pull in that first deployment. Yeah. Connections don't work. We don't have the right drivers. We need to get the security figured out. Like that's the configuration stuff. The certificates are missing, that sort of thing. But the content itself has actually been pretty, I will say it's been consistently importing fine. So I like to see that. And so I kind of, I tend to do that as early as I possibly can. And it won't be the one that I'll leave in. I might even blow it completely away and bring it back in again. But I love to see that I can actually pull in the stuff, that the security is there, that the content comes in. Like I'd like to know that as early as possible. So,
yeah.
My ideal world, I pull in an app server. I build an app server. I would pull in a deployment of a backup of prod or whatever that might be. And I may still get them to blow away the content store and do it again. But at least I know immediately if it's like the basics are working. So
gotcha.
I need applause early for that type of
stuff. positive. That's agile, right? It's just agile.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
That's what we'll call it.
Uh-huh.
Not my need for praise.
A couple comments. So Murali made a number of points related to data sets and how they really liked data sets and data modules, but maybe there are some elements of them that aren't really ready for prime time. And this is like an ongoing conversation between you and I specifically. So it's interesting to see other people experiencing this as well. One point that they made that I would address is just, the 8 gigabyte limit for data sets. And IBM saying that it's a bad idea to go above that. I think so. We have had some success, for example, going into the compute service settings on the query service in the advanced properties. The default limit for that is 8 gigabytes, meaning if you have a data set larger than that, it'll start dumping to that data directory that we discussed earlier. Mm-hmm. I can think of a number of clients that we've upped that to 16 and haven't had any problems. So I'm also aware that IBM kind of says, don't touch that.
Yeah.
And I know we often have IBMers watching. So if maybe someone who's watching could share the justification for that. But I can tell you that Rory and I, for example, turned it up for the power company in Wisconsin that we work with. And it really dramatically improved the performance of the data sets. And we haven't had any stability problems or anything like that related to it. So that might be something you might want to look at. The other thing I would think about with the size of the data set is I think really being judicious in what columns go in.
Yeah.
And then, for a row count, try not to exceed 8 or 10 million. If you can get, 8 million rows without too many columns, I think you should have a pretty good experience. But, it's a your mileage may vary type of thing. I agree. That's running on Spark SQL. And so maybe one of the pieces of feedback we should provide to IBM is like, look, this is running on a platform that can chug huge amounts of data. That's, right. 8 gigabytes to Spark is nothing. So what do we need to do in Cognos to make it so that it can take advantage of that fact? And I understand IBM wants it to be simple. Mm-hmm. They don't want you to have to administer Spark. My colleague, Jean-Georges, is like a Spark guru, right? You don't want to have to, IBM doesn't want you to have to call him.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate, but we do need maybe that to be able to process a little more data. So that'd be my feedback there. And then Karan brought up again, maybe, I don't know if you've run into this, but the Cog Startup XML from 11, he's saying that when using a Cog Startup XML from the 11.0 release stream, going to 11.1, that there were some sections of the Cog Startup marked as disabled equals true that were actually needed in 11. And so that took them a long time to figure that out. I don't know if you've run into that at all.
Yeah. I think it depends on how you've done that. So, so if we're doing a new install, not over top, I have found it easier not to pull in the old content or the old Cog Startup, but to go in and reset that stuff myself. That way I'm getting whatever tweaks are in the new Cog Startup. I don't know if that's I don't think that's necessarily a best practice. It's just what's worked for me. And I often go to customers where I don't necessarily know what was done in the past. It's a little bit trickier when you're at your own company where kind of what's needed. So for me, what I find is I will start with a clean Cog Startup, put in the stuff that I want in there, and do the testing and make sure that everything balances kind of from there. It's not the fastest way to do it, that's for sure. Like dropping it in would be easier. But this way I feel like I have then I'm in control of all the pieces that get put in there. So again, I don't know if I haven't noticed it, but I also don't do that. So I don't know. That's a trickier one for there.
Gotcha.
With the upgrade, I haven't noticed anything that has some kind of, like if it's over top, I haven't noticed there's any issues of like things that got disabled or anything like that. So maybe it's just something I haven't come across.
Yeah, that brings up kind of a good transition to, talking about moving things from one environment to the next and all of that. When it comes to content management and testing, one of the things that I often get asked is related to, the content store. Should I just upgrade the entire content store? Yep. Should I do a full content store export import, or should I, make an an export folder and only move the content I actually want to the export folder, for example, how should I be picking and choosing or going about actually moving the content between one environment and the next?
Yeah. Again, my standard consultant answer. So, I mean, here's how I would normally approach it. I guess that's probably an easier one because it depends. It depends. So, like I said, in our internal Cognos environment that I upgrade, I do not create a new content store. It's not production. It's not like the people who are depending on it are internal people, and I will beg for their forgiveness before I'll ask for permission or anything like that. So I'm just going to do it.
Yep.
But so in that situation, I don't create a new content store. I just point it to the old one, upgrade and go. But for a customer, would never do that usually. Sorry, guys. But for for a customer, so we've done it both ways. We've taken a copy of your content store for whatever version it was. Basically, what I would do is just leave that alone. Take a copy of, let's say we're doing this in SQL Server. Take a copy of that database, give it a new name, point to that one, and go from there. That's better for point versions. That's better for kind of the day-to-day upgrades, not the big ones, but nobody's going to notice, but we did a code fix upgrade or something like that. For a big version, so 10 to 11.2, something like that. In that case, I go with a clean content store, just an empty database. Let it build up. Because there's often a lot of extra stuff inside of there. Then it's a decision. Are we going to go with a full content store import, which will bring in all the old junk and all the old stuff that we would have before, good and bad? You might do that one, or ideally we'll do a smaller subset. So this is one of those times where, if I had my ideal world and I was going to be able to do this kind of entirely the way I would want to do it, I would want to clean up security at that point. I would want to clean up old content. I would want to only bring the most important new stuff over that we want to work with. So I don't want to bring in a report that's called 2019 August 7th so-and-so's copy of this report. I'd want to bring in just the stuff that is what we're actually using. So I'd want to have the time ahead of time to go through with people and pick out all the content that we want. Use a tool like Thrive to go in and, what is actually getting run? What are your real top, 100 reports, whatever that might be. Does that happen in the real world? Not often. That's what we would love to do, but everything is important to everyone and everything has to come in. Sometimes recreating the security would be a nightmare, and figuring out making sure all the schedules are going to come to the right people. So I would say 99% of the time we do a full content store upgrade. We will take a deployment from prod, pull it in, go in and disable all the schedules and things that have to run. And then try to clean the content out from that point. It's not ideal, but that's really what we do generally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it is definitely one of those things. And I'm glad you mentioned Thrive. A little plug for Thrive there. Yeah. Thrive is, if you do want to actually clean stuff up before you do an upgrade, Thrive is a great tool for that. And we're actually running on kind of now through end of year sale on Thrive where it's 40% off. So if you've seen Thrive before and you thought it was cool, you saw that it was useful, now would be a great time to give us a call and take a deeper dive on it, because we are running that special through the end of the year. I'm the Thrive product manager in addition to the YouTube guy, so I gotta put a little plug in there for my baby. But
I'd also say, just from my own very personal experience with my current customer, we've solved 3 problems in the last week and a half after we finally got it up and running and set up and introduced it to the user group, and we found 3 different things that we could fix that immediately made a difference. So we had a report that was running long. We're able to use Thrive to say that it was running at 5 minutes right now. It used to run at 23 seconds. We had made a code fix in the time. We were able to go back and find it. So I think, it's good for upgrades, but our everyday activity with Thrive actually has been really useful as well. So there, my plug for Thrive, since
thank you, son.
it just saved me. So very good.
So when it comes to the testing, is it a good practice to like, people should be testing in the environment that most mirrors prod? Would you agree with that?
No, for sure. Yeah. You don't have to do it again. I mean, that's the deal.
Right.
So one of the things, like we talked about the different, like when you do each server, if your QA server is virtually identical to your prod server, you can do your testing in QA. If your QA server is really different from your prod server, there's really no point in doing, like, you might want to do some initial, does stuff run tests, but there's no point in fixing content and doing that stuff if you're not, if you're not sure that if you're going to have to redo it again once you get to prod.
Yeah.
That's kind of the deal. So,
and I've definitely done upgrades, and you talk about kind of the perception part of managing an upgrade, which we're going to discuss in detail in a little bit, but I've participated in upgrades where, for whatever reason, we're doing all our testing on a single server machine for a large environment. And you tell users, like, hey, just so you know, like, everything's going to be real slow, but it's not, it's just because we're testing on this testing box, and don't worry about that. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't work, right? They come in here. This is their first experience with the new version.
Right.
They come in here and their report that used to run in 7 seconds is taking a minute. Like, that just, don't do it, right?
No, exactly. Well, and you want to know that if you get to prod, like, so sometimes you'll test in dev and everything does run fast because maybe your dev data sources are pointing to smaller subsets of data. So you do need to know what the actual performance implications will be in prod, both faster and slower. Both are important.
Yeah.
So
we have a couple of Thrive questions here. Jan asks, what is the cost for Thrive, and is it a cloud tool? So Thrive's list price is $50. It's a subscription. Okay. So it's a yearly cost. The list price is $15,000 US per year, $15,000 US per year. The discount we're running through the end of the year is $9,000 US per year. So you lock that price in. That's not just like a year one discount. That's a forever discount at that lower rate if you jump on board between now and the end of the year. And there's a cloud and an on-prem option. So we actually prefer the cloud option, even though it costs us more money to run, because we have the ability to make sure you have a good experience. We patch the software, keep it up and running, keep it performant, that sort of thing. So it's between now and the end of the year, $9,000 US per year subscription. And yes, cloud, but there's an on-prem version as well. Both options are available. So this is where we get to the question that we had earlier, like content testing. What are my bulk testing options, and how do I handle that? And so the question earlier was, I believe what they said is, we're doing an upgrade and we used PI Pro to validate everything. Yep. Does that mean that everything will work?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Wishy-washy. Yeah, I mean, that's the challenging part. So just in prep for this, I did a validation of one of my customers' current prod environments using Modio Pro, and I got lots of past validation and lots of warnings, and that can be something like there's prompts that are unanswered. It doesn't, so no, that I mean, if it's going to give you things that it's going to try and see what happens. Some of the things you'll see will be errors, some will be warnings. You still have to go in and do manual testing. Will the rows match? If you have Modio CI and you've been using it faithfully in the 10 environment or the 11 environment or whatever version that you're on, and you have test cases set up that actually have the prompts put in and that sort of thing, that's a great way to do testing. So, I mean, that's not a, kind of a, it has a little bit more commitment that you have to put into it, and it's more of an investment. But that, that type of testing is really good. So you can actually get outputs back and compare. Are you getting the same number of rows back? Are you getting, did your formatting get entirely changed? And like I said, testing is always a bigger job. I think it's probably a direct quote that you have there at the bottom for me.
It is. That is a direct quote.
Testing is always harder than you think it is, unless it isn't. So, there are magical situations where you go to test and everything just works. Fantastic. Can I tell that before we go in and we start to do it? No. I mean, that's the really hard part. So, we've done a lot of upgrades. I've, personally done, I don't know, we do 2 or 3 a year minimum kind of thing, plus our own content and stuff like that. If the majority of the time I can look at it and have a pretty good idea of what might happen. Like, so have you done a ton of customizations? Do you have JavaScripts built in? Are you okay with it going from, exactly as it is to exactly how it is in the new system? That part of that testing is usually pretty... I will say Cognos has done a very good job of you being able to import your content and move it forward. Where we get a little tricky is, did you build in, have you followed Cognos Paul for a long time and you've hacked, changed a lot of JavaScript stuff and stuff like that. It will work as is. So you cannot move it. Like, you might not be able to move it into the interactive mode. Like, let's say you're going older versions to new versions. So that's where you start to see some things that come up. And usually, like I said, you can keep it working kind of as it is. If you want to get some of that newer, fancier, interactive functionality, that's where you might have to do some remediation of the stuff that's already in there. So again, so it depends again.
Yep. Well, that's the part. I guess that's one of the big messages of the presentation. So overall, these are how you should expect things to go. However, it depends. And I'll say too, when it comes to that PI, the PI and validation question, I one time was doing a paid scoping engagement for a CQM to DQM migration, which, if you've ever tried to do that, that is the ultimate "it depends" upgrade, right?
Even while you're in the middle of it, it depends. Yeah.
It's wild. And so, over the course of that, I did a comparison of like validation versus actually going in and running the reports. What I found is that at least in that example, when a report failed validation, whether a report failed or passed validation seemed to have about a 65% relationship to whether or not it actually executed properly.
Right.
So like, you can use it as, it's like you can use it to tell you which way the wind's blowing, but it's not going to tell you whether or not it's raining, be the analogy I'd use.
Yeah. No, great. And it is helpful. I mean, it does give you an idea, if it fails right away, well, at least there's something that you should look at. But even if it passes, validation alone isn't necessarily going to give you right. Like, is the data right? Does your optional prompt work the way you think it's going to work? Like, there's a lot of little pieces that fall in there that you just have to be very careful of. So,
and there are definitely times when it will pass validation, but the report itself will not execute. Like the report, because what is validation doing? It's not running the report; it's checking to make sure the report spec is valid.
Yeah.
Right. And so you just can't rely on it. It's a good starting point.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Karan says testing is the biggest challenge you're going to upgrade. One can never be sure. Absolutely. This is the piece. And I will tell you, I mean, just as someone who, I don't know, real talk. I've talked to a lot of you about your upgrades who are watching this now or will watch it in the future. And this is always a point where customers will want to, if they are going to say, look, I think we need to get this scope smaller. One of the ways that they'll do that is they'll try to cut down on testing. And that's fine, but you just have to understand really what the implications of that are. And if you are working with PM Square or another consultant, this is an area that you theoretically could handle a lot yourself, maybe with just guidance from us. And so that's another way to think about it. If you are engaging with PM Square, that we can help oversee the testing, but if you can do a lot of it yourself,
Right.
and you're confident that you can do a good job, well, that's one way to help get your project scope smaller.
Right. So an example that we just did, it was a CQM to DQM conversion, but so I did the actual conversion. I brought the report in and I validated the report. I would run it to make sure that it made sense and I was getting sensible data back. So that part all belonged to me, and that was something pretty technical. That was stuff that I was an expert at, and I could make that work. Then I would pass it off to their technical resource at the company, and they would run it through Modio. And they were the ones that had the scenarios built. So, these were heavily prompted reports. So this is the part where testing gets tricky. I can make sure that it executes, and I can make sure that, and with time, I can make sure that both reports are the same in 10 and 11, or 10 or 11 and 11, or whatever it is we're looking at, or CQM, DQM. But for somebody within the company who has a better understanding of both what options should be selected for prompts, test cases built, that sort of thing, that would have taken me much, much longer than it would have taken them to do it internally, because they knew the data, they knew the content, they knew what they were looking for. So I think, like I said, if you are trying to scope this and you are engaging with a consulting company, you can partner to do this. And I think, taking advantages, like I was great to do the technical piece, the kind of grunt work to make it work. But they were much better at doing the testing. Like once I had preliminarily tested it, they were better to go in and do the actual manual kind of, is it going to work in their world type testing. So
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind.
All right. So testing's done.
Yeah.
Now it's time for the production cutover and managing the go live. And a lot of the things that people talk about or I get asked, how do I handle a prod freeze? Should I do a prod freeze?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What about my content or my folders if you're still on Cognos 10? How do we handle that? Should we migrate them? Should we test them? Should we make the users test them? And then the final piece, and this is kind of a licensing question too, is like, well, if I do a soft cutover, which customers frequently want to do, where it's like, for 3 months, we'll leave 10 up and we'll have 11 up and we'll slowly move people over. Is that a good option?
So finally, just an answer where I can say, here's exactly how you have to do it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So this, there's, again, as many different ways to do this as there are companies out there. Depends on who your prod environment is. So if you're running this for internal inside your company, you can have a prod freeze, possibly. It really depends on how much self-serve you have. So let's say the way that we're currently running Cognos is as a report serving box. So it's not self-serve at this point. People are running standard reports that have been created for them. They're getting their outputs. They're maybe they're interacting with it, but they're not modifying things. If that's your environment, you can kind of prod freeze at that point. You can say, hey, we're not going to do any upgrades, or we're only going to do upgrades in the new stuff, or whatever that might be. If you have customers and you're following, your customers have been following Ryan along and doing all the self-serve stuff that's awesome out there, building their own dashboards, really hard to have a prod freeze. So you in that case, you have to be able to have kind of a plan for, okay, we're ready to go live. Before we go live, we now have to grab the latest content, whatever that might be, pull it all back in, and then make sure we've made all those changes before we roll it out to users. What's the best way to do that? That's tricky. Like it really, it depends on how much you've had to change. It depends on whether you're rolling new content out or you're just pushing over the same content. So if you can change the folder structure, you can move all your modified content to a new place, just bring in any changes, and you're good to go. If it's all self-serve, like the My Content section, that sort of thing, you don't entirely need this, but you probably need a full content store import as your last step before you go live. And that means any changes you make, you have to go back and remake, or you have to figure out how you're going to apply those. So this is one of those things that your go live production cutover discussion has to be early, and it has to be often. You really have to have a plan for this, and you have to just think of all the different options of what you might need to do in this case.
This is something that I find people really, really frequently forget
Yep.
to think about ahead of time. And then, go live is 5 days away and you think, wait a minute, what's the go live plan?
What did we change?
People. Yeah. So one of those things that, if you think about the very beginning of this presentation, then when we said, you got to think about stuff up front, that's the number one thing you got to do. This is one of those things. Make sure you do not forget to do this.
Yeah, no, for sure.
As far as 2 environments up at once, from a licensing perspective, if you're on named user licenses, you can have 1 trillion environments up. It doesn't matter, right? But if you're on PVUs, things, and I'm not a licensing expert, but I sit in meetings where the licensing experts are discussing these things. So I'll do my best, but you can't take my word as law on this, okay? The rule is, say you have 240 PVUs. Well, if you've got 2 prod environments, a 10 and an 11, and they're each 240 PVUs, you're over deployed, right?
Yeah.
Now, I do believe IBM does kind of have there's a little fudge factor built in there where, look, nobody's going to come down on you super hard because there was a 2-week overlap or something like that.
Yeah.
But this definitely not something you want to let continue on for months, right?
This is one of those times where I would say ask for permission, not forgiveness. This is, you're better off asking about it in this one. And I know it's tempting, like we talked about. Do you leave 2 environments up and do a soft launch? That's good in theory. It's less good in reality. Having the 2 environments, again, it really depends on your use case and your business users and all that stuff. But I mean, it's almost always better if you can push everybody at the same time. You might want to keep it running, but in the background, you might take away the URL and stuff like that. Like you have the servers up ready to go. But you really should have your users move at the same time if you can. It's just too much to manage if not.
Okay, so we've gone live. And now, we've done the cutover, and the question is, what do we need to look for in our new environment to make sure that it's performing well, especially say we're going from 10 to 11 or an early version of 11.0 to 11.2.1. What are the knobs we need to turn potentially to make sure things are humming along and people are happy?
Yeah. So we've kind of discussed some of these things before, but again, and it's a bigger deal if you're moving from old to newer versus you've already been on new and you're just point upgrading, that sort of thing. But if you've done a full content store upgrade, full content store deployment, or you've pulled in that full content store, one of the things that doesn't come in are your server configurations. There are things that are set at the server, like the app server level. So things like your auditing and your logging, your query service memory settings, that sort of thing, number of high and low affinity connections. If those were set at a server level, like right on the properties of the server, they don't pull in when you pull the content store in, because that's not where they're stored. So the big one, and what we see often is, we've been live for a while, and we go to run some audit, whether you use Thrive or you use the audit store or anything like that, and all of a sudden there's almost no information in there.
Yeah.
Number one thing that happened is it's still set to minimum, your logging settings. So one of the things I do as soon as I do an upgrade is I usually go in and make sure that the server settings that we've set, either the special properties that we've set or the number of dispatchers, I need to make sure that at least it's capturing what it was in the past. So I'll go make sure that they match for there. Then you have to look at the performance. So do we need to tune it for new functionality? Do we need to go in and make sure that sort of thing's running? So those things need to be done. Like, so as an admin, getting into the admin console is important to go through and make sure that that matches. You may also need to do, we were kind of talking about the licensing implications. So if you're a PVU user, you do need to have ILMT installed, which is the way that IBM audits or proves that you're using just as much PVU as you're supposed to be using. Particularly important if you're on a virtual environment, so that you don't sort of, on-prem machines that are fixed are one thing, but if you're running virtual environments, you really need to make sure that you're only using the PVU that you say you're using from there. So that's a whole different beast. We could do a whole week on that one alone, but you do need to make sure that you're doing that properly, especially if you're PVU licensing.
Yeah, that's really crucial too. I think what will happen in that case too is IBM, let's say you're in a virtualized environment, but you don't have ILMT installed. IBM will then come in and the audit team will say, well, look, this box had 256 processors on it.
Yeah.
And so you should pay for 256 processors worth of Cognos because we don't know you weren't running it on all 256. Yeah. So you really need to watch out for that if you are in a PVU environment. And what about with the Cognos 10 licenses? When they map into Cognos 11, is there any weirdness that can occur that can get you into trouble?
Yeah. So like no matter what version you're on, you really have to go through the capabilities. So the licensing is all tied to capabilities. And because Cognos sets those capabilities for you to start, we often kind of ignore, that's a thing that gets dropped off of most projects. We don't, or that often will kind of like, oh, it works. My users get to see what they are. So there's like a couple of little things. Like if you leave the everyone group in the system admins option, that means everybody is an administrator. There are a number of capabilities. I was going to send you an option of this. I didn't, but there's a number of capabilities that actually make you an admin. Yeah. So if you don't go through those capabilities very carefully and make sure that your users who should be, let's say explorers are explorers or admins who are admins, you have to be super careful that you go through there. I think we did a blog post at PM Square at one point about kind of making sure that these capabilities are set properly. I took I made a task for myself at one point where I created new users, named them what roles I thought they would be, plunked them into different groups, and made sure that the capabilities all worked. And it took me a really long time to make sure that, users were ending up in their proper buckets. So this is not a small job. This is another one of those things we could definitely help you with, where, you can start to look at the different sets of capabilities. One of the things that this is bigger than just an upgrade, but IBM gives you all these different security groups when you sign in. I like to scale that back as far as possible to how we actually use our system. So in my ideal world, we would have 4 role groups, maybe 5, which would be tied to my licensing, that I could make sure that, if I'm paying for you as either a named user or a PVU style license, I would go in and make sure that, you're in this bucket. I might do other groups for keeping our content organized, but just for straight tool use, so I can control who has what access within the system. So it's a big, that's a huge topic. We could do another day on that if you want.
Yeah, we really could. All right. So that kind of brings us through the story of an upgrade from a technical perspective. So now we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about how do you actually plan and upgrade this thing so that it's not just technically successful, but perceived as a success, so that people look back on it and they say, boy, I sure am glad we did that Cognos upgrade.
Yep.
And so, we talked about it ahead of time or earlier, but just to reiterate, the number one thing you can do to make this perceived as successful is do the appropriate upfront planning. And the specific things that you absolutely have to get sorted out by day one, especially if you're bringing in a consulting firm.
Yeah.
Because the absolute worst thing that our clients sometimes do is we are doing a Cognos upgrade, and let's just say it's a 8-week engagement. We show up on day one and none of the items that you see here on this list have been accomplished. And that means that we can't start on day one, right? And so now we've got a fixed 8-week engagement, and you're racking up costs of the consultant, of our consulting time, but we're not making the type of progress we could have if these things were ironed out. And I think this is an important, I mean, it's not just for when you're engaging a consulting firm. You know, even if you're doing this entirely internally, presumably you have presented some form of project roadmap and budget to IT leadership. And now you don't want to come to the launch day and realize, you know what? We never had a content store database created.
Yeah.
And it's not just getting the work done. It's making sure that these teams are available and know what's happening and know that you may need to call on them, right? So it's not just filling out the form to get the DBAs to spin up a new database, but touching base with the DBAs, letting them know what's going on upfront so that they're not surprised by a call in 2 weeks when you say, hey, remember that content store I had you create? Actually, I need you to make another one, right?
Yeah, and I think part of it is messaging. Like I said, there's two ways these usually get done. They're done internally, and in that case, well, you might have the right contacts to get these things created. So, and there's a lot of little silly things that you don't think about, like we need a service account maybe set up for to run Cognos on the machine. Well, that service account might have to have access to shared folders on your network. Well, that could involve 3 different groups. So somebody has to create the user, somebody has to give access to the folders. You probably have to get permissions from somebody somewhere else. All that stuff, like I said, is not super hard to do. And most of the jobs that we ask other people to do for this stuff, like create a new database, it probably isn't it's not something that would be hard for that person to do. But like, do they know that they have permissions to do it? Like, are they, within the hierarchy of your company, that sort of thing. It's extra hard if you're looking for, as a consultant, it's really hard. Like, if I go and tell a network admin that I need a security set on a certain folder a certain way, do they know to expect that from me? Do I have the rights to say, hey, this is not the way we normally do it, but I need it for Cognos to work, that sort of thing. So I think having that communication ahead of time is critical. And like I said, there's really nothing worse than, I've hit when we hit a wall when we're doing an install, there's no RDP access to the server that we need or something like that. Well, I mean, like I said, as a company, we don't want to waste your money and we don't want to waste your time. So having that stuff set up at first is pretty important.
And I would go so far as to figure out who the relevant people are and get them all into a room for a kickoff meeting if you can, or onto a Zoom, depending on how you guys are doing business currently. And just even if you think that at any time you can hit these people up in teams and they'll be able to do what you need, I would still get them all into one place and get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Here's just an example of this is one of the reasons why I say Sonya is one of the best Cognos consultants, or the best Cognos consultant I've ever worked with. And it's just, the consistency and documentation and that she brings to every engagement is something that we really value and we know our clients value. So I don't know if there's anything you want to talk through here, or just, your thoughts on what you've decided to share.
Yeah. I mean, so this is kind of, I went back through a bunch of my different client, upgrade documents. So as soon as I'm told I'm doing an upgrade, at a customer, I have a folder that I copy over and I start working on. And part of it might even be just so there's often some time before we actually dive in, like before the questions are asked or after the questions are asked and before we start, where I can go through and I can just start to put in some information. So, what you see kind of over under the one that's all white is basically a copy of what would be a Cognos configuration. And so I can go through and I can pre-plan that. I can type in a bunch of stuff there before that I know is going to be there. So it might say something like server name, and whatever the path is. But I can then have something that's kind of that's ready to go for documentation for whoever's there. The one on with all the colors is kind of this wouldn't be very useful for almost anybody else to take as their materials, but it's basically my checklist for doing multiple servers. So one of the challenges with doing multiple environments is making sure you're doing all the same stuff on all the same machines, or on the right, the right machines at the right time. And a lot of these steps are like, you'll do half of them in one spot, then you have to go do something in another machine for a little bit, then you have to come back and remember to finish up and do something else. So I've created kind of my own checklist, and like I said, if you were to take a look at it, it'd be virtually meaningless to anybody else because it's kind of in my own my own shorthand for that. But it's a way for me to keep track of, on each of these machines, have I done all the steps that are needed to kind of mark them complete in the end. So this is kind of the way I work through and I love a good spreadsheet. So these are kind of my steps to make sure that I'm doing the same things every time. I often we'll do an upgrade and I may actually have to install the same machine a couple of different times, depending on whether we do have to change the size of it or do something else. So having something so I can very quickly whip through the steps there. I joke that, the easiest way to do an upgrade is to have done an upgrade 100 times before. So I know that's not an answer that you want, but a lot of this knowledge builds over time. So, I know when I see a problem, I may not know exactly what's wrong, but I have a good idea where to go look for it. So having some of these notes are actually, it's also, it's actually something pretty useful to keep when you're going through. So that's kind of what those are.
Great. And then managing multiple installs. What are your thoughts on that?
So this was another thing that I've done at customers where, again, just a couple of little screenshots just of what's kind of happening there. But depending on the way the environments work. So the last upgrade I did, each environment was slightly different depending on the security of that environment. So it had custom Java files that would be different on each environment. So what you can kind of see in the bottom little screenshot in the middle of the screen is, I have a shared folder that has the software install files, and then I had a separate folder for dev and for dev prod and QA, app server and gateway. And within those, as I customize files or as I make configuration changes, I actually created that same file structure that would be inside of the IBM Cognos Analytics folder, so basically, you can kind of see in the one that's all by itself over there, it has a bin64 folder, a configuration folder, drivers, web apps, web content. Well, I have custom files I had to put in each one of those things where I could, instead of having to make sure I'm moving everything into the right place, every time I do an install, I could just drop that folder on top of it. So it's not actually a copy of that entire folder. It's basically empty folders probably to get to the point where, that configuration file is. But that type of stuff can really keep you organized. And if you do, let's say you have a catastrophic failure and you have to go rebuild a server, at some point, being able to just we can spin an AWS server up, I can install the Cognos software, and then I can drop this folder on top of IBM Analytics, make sure the configuration's right, start it up. And I don't have to make sure that I remember to put drivers in drivers, which I forget every single time I do an install. I forget the drivers. So
yes.
This way it just lets me drop it in. So for something like this one that we're looking at right now might it could be the images that have to go into the web content folder, for example. So I can put those there. If I spin a new gateway up, I just drop the images in. I drop that whole thing in without having to remember what the path is for that. So anyway, those are a couple of little things that, I learned over time when you're doing upgrades to kind of keep this stuff ready to go. Super useful. Went back to the customer again, had to spin up a machine, could just drop that stuff on. I didn't have to go back and refigure all that stuff out again. So, it's good for anything custom that you do where you can kind of keep a set of folders like that. So that's one of my technical things.
I think this is a real pro tip here, and I hope people who aren't using these types of techniques take to them, because it's, when you think through like having this where you can kind of, like you said, you drag and drop, and then all of the necessary configurations and customizations are just kind of pasted in to an environment, makes things just vastly easier. And this is one of the reasons why, when I'm doing a Cognos install, like, I'm not as organized as Sonya. That's not my personality, right? And so one of the reasons why I go to her to say, okay, what should I be doing here? What are the best practices? And one of the reasons I'm very glad you agreed to join us today.
Awesome.
So managing expectations during the upgrade. This is an important thing for you to do. You have to have a realistic plan. And I would say most of our Cognos upgrades at PM Square, and we've done a lot of them, take between 2 and infinity weeks to finish. So, and even there's also with the pace of Cognos releases, although it has slowed down a little bit in the last year and a half, but I do think their intention is to get back to kind of that quarterly release cycle. You're almost always in some phase of upgrade planning, and so. But be realistic about it. If you don't do yourself any favors, if you tell everybody your 12-week upgrade is going to take 8 weeks, it might help you. It might help you in the short run get a little more buy-in, but when it ends up taking 12 weeks, that will really hamper the perception of how the upgrade went. So it's really important to be realistic up front. The communication with stakeholders is very important, especially for really complex or critical environments. So like if your Cognos environment could be subject to a SOX audit at any time, for example, which I've done 2 SOX audits as a Cognos developer and administrator back before I got into consulting, or it's just a really important piece of your data architecture at your organization. I mean, it's critical no matter what, but I think especially in those situations, it's important. And it's really important too, to make sure that you understand and that users understand what they need to do. What is the plan for them? Do they need to test content? If so, when? What? Right? In really big environments, my experience is a lot of times the end users do have to test content because there's too much content for any BI team or consulting team to effectively test. Making sure people know that. Making sure that you have identified milestones and you report them out when you hit them, so that to the relevant stakeholders. And really a big thing is that this could be a lot of effort. Make sure when you're talking with your end users, and this is something that I've experienced a lot, especially like when you talk about my content folders or my content. You see, so let's imagine you've got 1,000 users, and you say to them like, "Hey, what things do you actually use in your my content?" A lot of people are going to say everything, and so don't be afraid to push back on that and say, we really need you to really pick the most important things, because if there's something that you're using only once every year or less, or you used it 2 years ago, or Sonya's example, that 2019 Q3 whatever report, I mean, that report's not useful anymore. So I would make sure you push back on people and say, look, we're not migrating content that doesn't get used. But overall, Sonya, what advice would you have for people for managing expectations going into and during an upgrade?
Yeah, I mean, you've said it straight out. It's people. Everything is critical. And I understand that. Like, we will move everything over. Like, if that's what, people are worried they're going to lose their stuff. What I think we really have to be very careful of is that where we put our testing time. Like we've talked about this. It's, I can have your servers mostly installed. Usually within a week, we could have we could do every server install. Like this, it's not, the server install piece of it is actually not a really hard part of this. The upgrade piece is actually the content that's there now and the new stuff. So I think, if it's critical that we test, we like what you said, we need to be testing the right stuff. We need to be, and honestly, most companies don't know what the right stuff is. That's the biggest challenge. There's no question. If you're all internal, it's one thing. If it's customers and they're doing self-serve, you don't know that the tiny query that they made, to do that, it could be how they're running their whole business. Like, you really have to
Right.
know what's there. It may just look like a straight Excel report dump that isn't important, but so having that understanding ahead of time is key. There are usually a number of people within an organization that might not be on the dev team or the BI team, who actually have a pretty good handle on some of this stuff, whether it's your customer service managers or there. We got to engage them right from the beginning. So, like, a Cognos upgrade shouldn't be happening in secret behind closed doors. Like, we need to make sure that it might not be the people who you think are the stakeholders who are the stakeholders in this. So it's this is the stuff that is super hard to do, but it will make you successful, and it's the stuff that takes the time. Like, we like you said before, we've the upgrades that we do, like, we can do an upgrade really quickly. It's the stuff that makes it a good upgrade that takes a really long time generally.
Yeah. Yep. That's important to understand. I think, as we're cruising into the end of today's session here, we got a little bit more to talk through, but I think this is one of the most important things to consider is life after the upgrade, and I use the term delighting users. I took that from if you're into like data stuff, there's this storm of like data mesh right now. Is it good? Is it bad? What is it? Nobody knows. But that's a term that Zhamak, who's the creator of the data mesh concept, uses a lot, is delighting users and think about data as a product. And this is something I talk to people about all the time. You need to think about your internal BI as a product that people are required to want to use. If you're a Cognos administrator, a Cognos developer, or in charge of an enterprise BI team. And the reality is that you need to think of it that way because it is. People have options for how to do their BI like they have never had in the past, both in terms of the tools that are out there and the latitude that the business units have taken in the last decade to buy their own stuff. Create their own data silo. If they're not delighted with what you can offer through Cognos and the data warehouse or Lakehouse or whatever it is that you're maintaining centrally in IT, they're going to find something else. And the upgrade time is the time when you have the ability to shift into this product thinking and think about what are people actually going to want to do in this environment, especially if you're finding yourself pigeonholed into this old school reporting world, which is still super valuable. I'm not denigrating it all. It's the core of a lot of what is still done in business intelligence. But if you want to break out of that a little bit and you want Cognos to break out of that, the upgrade is the time to do it. Have the end goal of, say you're going from, we were talking about 11.17 to 11.21 earlier. Ideally, the end goal of that upgrade is not just it looks different, right? You should have something new to offer people. Now, if you're on 11.17 and you're already using the full capability of the tool, well, there are still things you might be able to do, right? Are there ways you can open things up a little, change your processes, make it friendlier, not in terms of the tool itself, but in terms of the way you do things. And I talk to people about this all the time in kind of my role as one of the people you talk to if you're engaging with PM Square technically, right? Technical pre-sales. I handle a lot of that here. This is the only time in maybe, the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, if you're still on Cognos 10, that you are going to have the space and budget and time to do something a little more creative. This is it, right? For a lot of organizations, because that's just the way things work, right? Upgrade time is the time where you can say, hey, we really need to make sure that in this scope of work, we have some plans to use the new features. Or we're going to change the way we deliver analytics, right? We're going to try to not be so siloed and monolithic. We want more collaboration. We're going to use Cognos as a platform for that. Now is the time to do it. I often encourage people to think about what's the coolest thing you could possibly give somebody within the upgrade scope. And you know that, right? I don't know that, but you know it, right? What can we get done at this organization in an upgrade that would make someone go, wow, I am glad that we did that. Not just, yeah, we're in compliance. Yes, we can upgrade the data center to more modern machines. That's all important. But it's critical at this time that you think about delighting users as an outcome of the upgrade. And I have this last bullet point on there, the real talk. There's very rarely an upgrade phase 2. So I have at least 15 times, I would say, scoped out an upgrade that included all of this stuff. We're going to do a persona exercise. We're going to, really make sure we roll out dashboards and we're going to rethink the way we do analytics. We're going to give each department the ability to create their own stuff and identify stewards. I mean, the whole 9 yards, right? And then over the course of negotiations, we start looking at the price tag and those things get lined out. And this doesn't just happen when you work with consultants. If you're going for internal budget to try to do an upgrade, you may have these exact same experience, except you're the consultant, not me, right? And oftentimes what gets said is, and I've heard this, like I said, probably 15 times, you know what? We're going to take all this stuff out of the upgrade. But we're going to do it in upgrade phase 2. And I'm here to tell you, upgrade phase 2 never happens. It just doesn't. And it hasn't happened yet for me. Now, maybe it does occasionally, but it's just, that's when you have the time and the budget. So if you want to change the way you do things or the way you're perceived or Cognos is perceived in your organization, like, you need to do it during the upgrade. That is, as soon as the upgrade's over, you are going back to operational stuff. My report's not running. Hey, I put in this request to add a new column. Why isn't the new column added yet? Hey, we got this new database. We need a new FM model for the new database. You're going right back to that stuff the second the upgrade's done. So all your wish list, you got to get the wish list in during the upgrade. I think I can get a little preachy about this point, but I've worked with a lot of clients who do upgrades and then they say, man, I wish we did that stuff. And I wish they did it too. That's the difference between, yes, we are in compliance with the new version of the software and we don't have to worry about critical bugs no longer being patched. And man, I'm sure glad we did that. I don't know.
It falls into change request stuff once you're done the upgrade too. That's the other deal. So we kind of get our hands tied often at organizations where, in that magical upgrade time, I don't have to clear it with anybody that I'm creating a new data set and a dashboard or a story or something like that. But as soon as you're back into the real world, the upgrade is complete. Then everything becomes a change request. I need to rename a field. Well, let's change request. And so it ends up this is your magical, maybe we're making it sound better than it is, but this is the time when you actually have the ability to show off some of this new content. And then it's more of I can get my email with my spreadsheet the same. If that's all the whole point of the upgrade at the end is that you just get your same Excel spreadsheet emailed to you, then that seems like a lot of work for nothing kind of thing. So if you could add in that special content, hey, suddenly we can show a story that actually adds detail and data, and that's interactive, that we can now put up on the screen in our lobby to talk about what our company does. That's where you get some real that's the real power, and that's where you'll get your next upgrade next time, because you've proven that you can kind of not just upgrade your Excel report, but get to that next level of analyzing your data.
Yep. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes I think people they think it's got to be a big thing, but a lot of times we just say, just pick a single use case that is important, that you've struggled to deliver in your kind of day-to-day, due to your day-to-day commitments. And let's just put that in and kind of do it in a new, cool way rather than an older, less cool way. And that can be it, right? It can be as small as that, but let's make sure we get it in here.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. So the last point we want to make is if you need help doing this, you should ask for help. and obviously you can come to us for that, right? We would love to help you with your upgrade. We've done a ton of them. Sonya's done a ton of them. She's incredible at them. I think you've probably picked that up over the course of this live stream. But a couple of things to think about. Do you need training? Now, Sonya, if you recall, when she was introducing herself, she said she started at Cognos in the pre-acquisition days as a trainer. And so she developed all of we have our own custom training here at PM Square. We don't reuse the IBM training. Honestly, I don't even know if the IBM training still exists. But Sonya has made all of our own stuff. And so, what are your thoughts around, hey, I'm doing an upgrade.
Yeah.
Do I need to train? Who should I train? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, this really depends on where you're moving from, and who's using your system. So again, it comes back to those initial questions of, where does Cognos fit in your organization? So here's the deal. If you're a developer or an admin, and you've been working with Cognos somewhere in the last 10 years, you probably will be able to figure it out. There's a lot of new functions that are really neat to learn, kind of the same as with when you're doing an upgrade, this might be the time to get some training on what's new in the tools. So for sure, like I would love to train everybody. The person who needs the training the most, depending on where you're, like what level you're jumping up, will probably be your end users. So if you're going from anything 10 or even 11.0 to 11.1.7 to 11.1.2, your end users are probably going to need some help, because for them, it looks like a completely different beast. So, everything is in a different place. As a developer or an admin, you'll be able to find it. Like you'll know that the ... button means that, there's a menu there. So this is one of those things we see people, and I won't say fail at, but that they don't consider, is that, if you're going to invest the money into upgrading this, and you're really going to take the time to build this new environment and make sure it works well, if people don't know how to use it, they won't use it. They'll drop back to whatever other tool they have. They go back to their spreadsheet or anything like that. If you're going to start to introduce self-serve, which we've been talking about a ton in the last little while, but if this is finally your chance that you're going to put this into their hands, make it worth their while. Make sure that they know how to do that. And that'll be a blend. Like it might be something from us where we take you through how the tool works. But it also, it steps beyond that. It's not just the kind of formal training on the tool. It really should get into, how can I take the data that we have, like the stuff that we've created for them, and how can they make decisions based on it? So that might be internal. It doesn't have to be a formal, like here's a guide and here's a presentation. It might just be, let me talk you through how we use this. And this gets into Ryan's like persona roles and stuff like that. But it's really important that we don't just drop this on somebody's lap and then walk away from there. So if you want this to be a successful upgrade, I think training is a big part of it.
Yeah. Sure. Yep. And then, have a great team behind you. So obviously the plug, right? We do a lot of Cognos upgrades, and we would love to be the team that helps you do this. However, there are a lot of places you can look for assistance, right? There's a good conversation goes on LinkedIn. There are people in the Cognos community who are posting great technical stuff all the time. Cognos, of course, has been around for a long time, and you're going to find lots of great. It's still pretty active, really, and so you're going to find a lot of good people there and great content archive. If you're running into a weird issue, I would check there. The Cognos subreddit, so reddit.com/r/Cognos. is another place where you can go. It's kind of Reddit is kind of like, it's like a message board where millennials and older Zoomers hang out, I guess is how I would describe it. But the Cognos subreddit there is decently active, and a lot of people who know what they're talking about. I'm the moderator of that subreddit, so go check it out and say hi. There are places out there to get help. Our videos on YouTube as well. We really believe at PM Square in building the Cognos community And that like nobody, Bruce Springsteen used to say this thing at his concerts where he'd say, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Right. And I believe that about Cognos. I mean, we being a better community, helping one another, helping everybody to level up their BI and Cognos skills is going to benefit everyone. And we really believe that here. And that's why we put out all this content. So, I mean, if you've been watching this whole time, you stuck around for an hour and 45 minutes to watch Sonya and I talk about Cognos upgrades. You are a true Cognoid diehard. Make sure you click the like button, subscribe and share anybody who you think needs to see this video, because I think a lot of great guidance on how to approach this upgrade, both technically and how to ensure that you come out of it with a win, that you feel good that you did it. At the end of the day, that's what matters. Do you feel good that you did this upgrade, and do your end users happy it happened? And that's really what we're here to help you figure out is how to ensure that happens. So with that said, Sonya, one final question. Okay. Yeah. We've talked about a lot of stuff here. What would you say at the end of the day is the most important thing that you need to make sure you have taken care of before you embark on a Cognos upgrade?
It's planning. I mean, it's going in with both a realistic plan and the right support behind you. So, I've done a ton of these upgrades, both like on just something as small as my own machine or on the servers we do internally or for lots of different customers. Being prepared when I go in is key, and actually having a great team behind me. So, this is one of those things that you with an upgrade, you're going to touch a million different pieces of there. It could be a firewall, it could be a certificate, it could be some weird IIS thing, it could be anything. So being able, like I said, the last slide of, having the right kind of place to find your resources, it's critical. And I think that's what, that's how we can be successful as upgraders of Cognos, is really just having the plan and then knowing how to get the right help behind you for that. So I think that's it.
Great. Well, thanks. Thank you for joining us today, Sonya. Really appreciate your willingness to jump on and do your first PM Square live stream with us. It was great having you. And we'll stay safe. And you and I talk all the time. So
yeah, we'll talk about 5 minutes from now, probably.
Yeah, we probably will. Okay. So, I'm just a few things before we wrap up here. Okay. A few things before we wrap up. I do want to, again, share with you if there is, which button do I want here? We get all this new stuff. There we go. So again, I hope this was very valuable for you. We went over a lot of stuff. This is the type of thinking we bring to upgrades. So if you need help with an upgrade, reach out to us. And this is kind of the level of thought that's going to go into making sure that your Cognos environment emerges from the upgrade better than it went in, and that people are happy that you did it. If you are sick of doing upgrades completely, check out the SaaS Anywhere offering. We call it SaaS Anywhere, but you don't have to be on cloud to use it. Whether you're on Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, say you're running Cognos on IBM's architecture, or you're on-prem, we can become kind of the administrative and maintenance arm of your Cognos so you can focus on other better things. Make sure you check that out. And then the final thing, 2 reminders. One, the Thrive sale. I know I mentioned it earlier on, but 40% off through the end of the year. So check it out. If you're doing an upgrade, Thrive is going to be very helpful. If you're not doing an upgrade, Thrive is going to be very helpful. And then finally, for events, now this is not all we have. We got more cooking, but things that you should be aware of. November 16th, go to pmsquare.com/events and register for the Planning Analytics features every multinational corporation should be using webinar. We have experience working with some very large multinational corporations, and they're very large, complex, and important Cognos planning analytics environments where the two are integrated. And so I would say whether you're a huge company or not, this is going to be very interesting. But especially if you're a large multinational, you're going to want to check this out. Okay. And with that, I am going to wrap things up here. I want to thank everybody for coming to another PM Square live stream. Final reminder, like button down below. Click it. Give us the thumbs up if you want us to keep this content coming and keep building the Cognos community out there, making a larger, more active, more communicative, more communicative community of practice around Cognos Analytics with Watson. And until next time, I am Vice President of Technology, Ryan Dolley, signing off for PM Square. Have a good one, everybody.